Welcome to the Impact Room, brought to you by Douglas Jackson, who help you hire more impactful, diverse leaders who stay for longer and are more successful. The Impact Room is a business, CX and leadership podcast where exceptional, diverse and impactful leadership and wisdom is shared. We dive deep into pressing topics that impact your customer-led business, featuring interviews with CEOs, COOs, Chief Customer, Chief People Officers, directors, influential leaders and subject matter experts who share their lived experiences, top tips, thoughts, advice and industry trends to help elevate existing and future talent. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you enjoy this content. Thank you.
Welcome to the Impact Room. On this week's session, I'm delighted to introduce and welcome Hugh Kenyon, previous pricing guru and pricing director at LV, who is now on the, I suppose the specialist in sustainability and the guru in sustainability, which, clearly from pricing to sustainability is a little bit of a journey in itself. But welcome, Hugh. How are you today? You well?
Hi, John. Yeah, I'm very good. Thank you. And
good.
I'm very thankful for having this opportunity, and having seen some of your previous podcasts and guests, I'm honoured as well to be part of this. So thank you.
No, I really appreciate you saying that, Hugh, and I really appreciate your time. It will be a bit of a journey for myself on a personal basis as well, because I wouldn't go as far to say that I am well educated in sustainability, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm aware of it and I understand all of the reasons behind why it's a good idea. But in terms of the ins and outs, I myself have next to zero sort of knowledge on it, so it'll be good for myself to understand, and hopefully the listeners can take something from it as well. So yeah, really appreciate your time, and let's sort of get into it. The first question I'll ask is a question that we ask every everybody that comes on to the Impact Room. So what, if you can, what would be your elevator pitch?
Thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah, my elevator pitch. So as you said, I retired from pricing director at LV that became Allianz UK last year, after over 25 years in insurance and 40 years in a corporate role in the UK, Europe and the US, and 10 years at the LV executive. And in my last 2 years, I set up as the executive sponsor for the environmental work stream in LV, as well as my pricing director role. And that really piqued my interest. And since retiring, I've been training myself in environmental and sustainability. And I think there is a role for someone who has both the technical understanding of environmental, because it's a complicated and complex area, and also that knowledge of how boards work and how executives work, to come in and help organizations put together and deliver a strategy. Executives are really busy, as I know, these days, and there's a number of priorities, and I would see myself as being able to come in, take these things away from people and be able to develop a strategy for them and allow the boards to move forward in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything that you've said there is completely correct. I mean, clearly sustainability is a massive topic and a massive agenda, and you're quite right. In terms of executive boards, committees, they are particularly busy at the best of times, and without having that sort of complete understanding of sustainability, it must be quite difficult for them to get their heads around strategy, or exactly what the first even steps would be. So I suppose to have somebody who is the expert in the matter to be able to come and help guide them, it will cut down time, by a hell of a lot, and ultimately time is a precious commodity, isn't it? You know, so makes a lot of sense. So Hugh, tell me a little bit more. What exactly is sustainability? How do you measure it? And you know, what importance does it have to an organization?
Okay, yeah. And well summarised, I think, before that, John, of the proposition. Those are three big questions, actually, in terms of what sustainability is. That, you know, there are definitions out there, and basically, the way I explain it is it's trying to have a great society today, but also making sure that society will be great for future generations. So, for example, you know, we have amazing goods, healthcare, etc., to support our lives today, but those require production. That production is producing CO2 emissions. Those CO2 emissions are clearly are outside what can be coped with by the planet, and that's creating risk, and that will have a risk for future generations and the cost of future generations. So sustainability is about how do we get that balance right between the needs of people today and the needs of the people in the future. In terms of measuring it, there is a UN 17 Sustainability Development Goals, which is very comprehensive. There's probably a few too many, I think people would say, but you know, it covers everything from poverty, education, as well as the environment. And there's ways you can measure them. There's these famous circular diagrams which sort of form a donut, where you've got the society objectives in the middle, but then outside you've got what the planet can cope with, and where we're reaching, where the risk you're looking at is where we're moving outside of those planetary boundaries. But when you look at that, what becomes clear is the two areas where we have major risks is one is within the greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, and the other is in biodiversity. But so when you start to focus on sustainability and start to try and measure it, I think you generally will start with your CO2 emissions and your carbon footprint. Why is it important to corporations? Well, there is regulation. I have to say, you can most meet the regulation without achieving a lot if you want to. I don't think it's the biggest driver. I saw a PwC report recently that said that 80% of consumers are willing to pay more for a sustainable product. And then on average, it was 9.7% more. So I'm not saying this is about profit. I think I'm saying that's a clear indication that consumers really care about this. And as an organization, you want to be offering what consumers want. Likewise, employee engagement and recruitment will be impacted by these sustainability policies. Shareholder activism, we're seeing quite a lot of that, particularly in the banking sector. I'm sure that will become more widespread. HSBC have been, you know, accused of greenwashing by their shareholders. But actually, fundamentally, if you're being part of boards, you will be thinking not just about your profit over the short term. You will be wanting to build a sustainable business, and you will be thinking about that business over the longer term. And to have a sustainable business, you most probably need to have a sustainability strategy. And also, boards will, you know, they'll be thinking about their children, their grandchildren, their nephews, their nieces, and they won't want to be on the board of an organisation that is essentially creating risk to their future livelihoods. So I think it's an open door. You know, the vast majority of people want to do something about this, and it's just about helping them get it done.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you've said there makes a hell of a lot of sense. I think that, you know, 80% is a staggering statistic, to be honest. But it just goes to show the importance to the customer of sustainability. And you, like you said, any business, if you step away from the morality side of things, you want to be providing products and offerings and services, etc., that the customers actually, you know, want. And if the customers are wanting, you know, sustainable products, then it's a clear indication that that's the way to go. You know, the other side of the fence, in the morality sense, as you mentioned there, in terms of positioning an organization that can be sustainable for the future, not just the business, but the planet, basically, you know.
Yeah.
Like you say, for grandchildren and grandchildren's children, so on and so forth. Ultimately, you know, if you take the action now, you know, they might they might have a chance, I guess. Would be the suggestion of it. But I just wanted to ask you a little bit, you know, on something, and this is my complete and pure ignorance, I suppose, or lack of education on the matter. But what exactly do you mean by biodiversity? What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, okay. I can't tell you the statistics off the
Yep.
top of my head, but I think we're losing a large number of species.
Yeah.
You know, regularly, and plant species, insect species primarily. And I think there was and I think one of the things is it's happening gradually, so you don't notice. So if you look at the butterfly population, say in the UK, compared to what it was 40 years ago, there's been a dramatic fall in the numbers. I don't have the stats to hand, but we're talking sort of over 50%, 50 to 70%. But you don't really see that because your mind just looks at last year. But we are seeing from intensive farming practices, from logging practices, etc., we're seeing significant habitat loss, and therefore with that habitat loss, you're losing species, and this will have effect on people, not just in terms of people cherish biodiversity. It's a great, we love nature, but also there's a lot of our scientific breakthroughs in terms of medicines and healthcare have come from analysing various species and how they can adjust to their own environments. And so there's a potential loss to human well-being in terms of healthcare from losing biodiversity as well.
Well, I mean, it goes even deeper than that, right? Because even nutritionally for humans, if certain insects are becoming extinct, then the pollinization, I suppose, of certain plants, the whole landscape can completely change. And it quite literally is the butterfly effect, right? If with the reduced numbers of certain species, it's a phenomenal difference that it can make overall, right?
Yeah, I think what people are particularly worried about is the tipping points, where sort of events then lead to much larger change. For example, if you lose pollinators, then that could have a significant effect on the plant life. It's those sort of tipping points, particularly if they're very difficult to reverse. I think that's what a lot of the talk within the environmental community is around those risks and where they might materialize.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So Hugh, you yourself are a successful senior leader and you've had experience in a boardroom and the discussions around sustainability. What would you say that some of the pitfalls are in insurance around it, and what key considerations should be made when outlining strategies around sustainability?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing I've seen is environmental sustainability strategies which focus on energy use, business miles, printing, and they'll have set of KPIs around those, and they'll be tracking them and monitoring them and how they're going to reduce them. And I think that's partly come from regulation, actually, because that's what is required by insurers through CERC to track. And those are called direct emissions and scope 2 emissions. But actually, for an insurance company, the vast majority of the emissions, the CO2 emissions that they would be responsible for, are what's called downstream indirect emissions. So a good example of that would be your claims fulfillment. So if you write a policy, you are offering claims fulfillment to that customer. You may not be directly responsible from the emissions from claims fulfillment, but you are indirectly. It's a downstream impact of what you're doing. And from companies that have looked at this, for example, DLG did quite a lot of work on this recently. Over 95% of insurers' emissions will be coming from those downstream claims fulfillment emissions, rather than from the energy use of their head office.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're focusing on the wrong area if you're looking at those metrics I mentioned before. And similarly, actually, on top of that, there's also the emissions that you're responsible from your underwriting portfolio. You have some responsibility for what you underwrite and what it's producing. So if you're underwriting oil, a gas-fired, coal-fired power station, then you are providing a service that allows that station to operate. So you have some responsibility for their emissions. Similarly, if you're underwriting petrol or diesel vehicles. So your underwriting portfolio, and finally also your investments. Your insurers will be holding a large number of investors. What's in those portfolios? Have you got stocks in coal companies? So I think it's really important. For a board, it's great if you can shift your head office electricity supply onto renewable energy. That's a hygiene factor that you should be looking at. But if what you want to do is make a difference, you don't need to be looking there. You should be looking at your claims fulfillment, your underwriting portfolio, and your investment strategy.
To be perfectly honest with you, what you've said there in terms of the claims fulfillment, that surely that would be the biggest, wouldn't it? And it's not something on the face value of it that you would even consider. But even if you're looking at parts and where they're being shipped from and how they're being shipped and what modes of transport are they using and where are they coming from, and it all has a massive, huge knock-on effect, and that's going to be the biggest, because that's worldwide, really, isn't it? If you're dealing with a certain brand, if you look at motor, and the parts are coming from the other side of the world, that's going to be an absolute massive amount of carbon sources that have just got it there, let alone then the fitting and what the garages are using, or XYZs. So it is quite interesting, really. Just out of interest, do you think that a lot of organizations are even considering that, not necessarily out of well, as long as we're compliant, then that's fine, but do you think that they've even had the thought of, well, hang on a minute, what about that side of supply chain, etc., do you think that they've even thought about that, or do you think that it's organizations are purposefully thinking about it and thinking, well, we don't have to do that because we can remain compliant if we just look at HQ? And
so I think it's going to be a mix. I know some organizations have definitely been looking at that. For example, I mentioned DLG. I think this is another maybe potential pitfall as well. The other point is that it's very hard to measure the carbon footprint, because, as you say, you can you can look at, say, a repair centre, and there's a lot they can do on their carbon footprint. You know, for example, by changing how they manage their paint stations, you know, paint booths, etc. But a lot of it will be the parts that they import. Yeah, therefore you've got to go understand how those parts are put together. Those parts won't be one supplier. There'll be multiple supply chains to getting those parts together. So you can imagine how difficult it is, and it's putting through what's called in the industry scope 3 emissions. Trying to calculate the impact of your scope 3, all these downstream indirect emissions, is really, really hard. So that's why you don't often see them reported. But I think, once again, I don't think that should stop you from trying to make a difference, looking at your claims supply chain and saying, well, what can we do that will reduce emissions from them? There's a lot of actions you can do. And maybe measurement, you just have to accept that measurement's going to be difficult and it's going to be a long process.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I suppose when you think about anything like that, it's almost like you go down a wormhole, because everything would need to have been made from materials that have probably been mined from somewhere, and you can go right to the granular detail on it, and realistically, how do you measure that, and where do you even start by looking at that? But I think that I think it's more awareness and looking at what you can do, which isn't go into that granular detail. At what level can you go down that is reasonably straightforward or easy enough to measure, or that you can make some practical changes to be able to lower the emissions that ultimately that I suppose your organization is contributing to, right? So yeah, I've never really thought about that. I guess that's going to make me think about everything now. If everything that I'm touching, everything that I'm using, I'm going to be thinking, oh God, no, killing the planet one day at a time. But hey, I suppose you're right. It's just being mindful, I guess, more than anything else, right? So what would be one piece of advice for an organization who are struggling with their sustainability? What one bit of advice could you give, or would you see as important?
Yeah. So when we started the environmental program at LV, what struck me and was really positive is there was so much already being done. People had just got on with it because they cared. So, for example, our claims, the team in claims who are managing our repair networks, I'm going to talk about motor again, sorry, but the people in claims who are managing our repair networks had started off a program where repair networks could certify themselves carbon neutral. So they would go through an audit, understand their carbon emissions, understand opportunities they could take to reduce them. As I said, it might be through their paint operations. And then offset their remaining. And actually, the repair networks were really keen to get on board. And you wouldn't have thought of repair networks as somewhere where you have a hotbed of eco-activism, but they were actually really, really keen to be involved in this program. So it wasn't as though we didn't need to be a top-down approach. It was more like, well, actually, what are you guys doing? Let's just get all this together and put it into a package that shows the changes. And I think an organization can potentially do a lot just by setting direction, empowering people to get on with it, and maybe just funds, small number of funds to support the initiatives, but most of this doesn't necessarily need a large. There's going to be tricky parts that need large investment, but a lot of it is things you can just do by changing the ways you're working today, and it's not significant cost. So I think it's about, there is big opportunity from just empowerment and setting direction and letting people do this within their day jobs.
Do you think that there's almost a fear within a lot of organizations of cost and investment that would be needed to you know, become carbon neutral as an example, right? But even the thought of sustainability, do you think that there are a lot of organizations that as soon as they hear that word are thinking, uh-oh, it's going to cost a lot of money for us to go all the way back and remap things and look at things? And do you think that people would be pleasantly surprised in terms of how little investment that it would take to make huge leaps and bounds in their sustainability, sustainable, I guess, practice?
Yeah, I mean, maybe huge leaps and bounds. Maybe I think once you get it into your thinking, then you will start down a route of reduction. It's not going to be a huge leap, but you're moving that direction that you want to go through. I think it can be, if it's a top-down process, it's not so much, it's finance, but it's also time and prioritization. I think, people, if you're saying, well, we need you to go through this process,
yes,
assessment, evaluation, etc., and people are like, but I've got to hit my growth targets, I've got to hit my profit targets, I haven't got time to do this assessment, or we need to audit your sustainability. Well, they're like, well, so I think that's more the difficulty, is when you're trying to push something different that people have to do onto them in order to achieve your objectives, and that's where you start to get the conflicts. Well, so I think there is an awful lot you can do by people just incorporating it, knowing where they need to look, providing some expertise on where they might want to look or might not want to look, and just letting them incorporate it into their work.
Yeah, I get it completely. I guess that there would be almost a resentment if you're, everybody stop what you're doing and you've got to go through everything to look at how sustainable you can make things right now, and you've got to change that. And clearly in business there's a lot of pressure, there's deadlines, and there's a lot of work to be done. To just down tools to look at sustainability would probably then mean people are chasing tail, which would then lead to resentment, as I said, towards it. And I suppose from what you've said there, it makes a lot of sense, whereby it's just being mindful of it moving forward and looking at little bit by bit, I suppose, rather than, right, it's this massive sort of project that we're going to throw upon you right now to look through every nook and cranny of what you're doing and see how you can make it more sustainable. And I think ultimately, as time moves forward, when processes are being reviewed anyway, if you're reviewing them with a mindset of being as sustainable as you possibly can, then it will ultimately make a lot of change incrementally as you're going along, right? And I suppose that's a good way of thinking about it, and I think that that would provide far less resentment and far less, I suppose, I don't want to say work, but you understand where I'm coming from. Less a big chunk of time all at once to try and sort of reinvent the wheel, I guess. So yeah, it's quite interesting, and well put, really. So what do you see as the biggest opportunity for insurance firms specifically, and why is that?
Yeah.
Would you say it's the claims?
When Kamala Harris was asked about climate change in the presidential debate, I don't know if you saw that, John, but her answer was actually started talking about insurance, about people not being able to get insurance, and people insurance premiums going up because of severe weather impacts.
Yeah.
So, having worked in the pricing, being in the pricing team, we are looking at the impact of weather events, particularly on property insurance and on commercial insurance, and how that's going to impact what we can underwrite, and premiums. And when you're looking at that, all you can see is that premiums are going to have to go up, and you, as an insurer, you're going to want to tighten up your underwriting. There's going to be, parts of, if you look at the UK, where flood risk is going to significantly increase, and you're going to have properties that you're going to say, well, we really don't want to underwrite these flood risks anymore. So I think insurers have a huge amount of knowledge and data and insight into the impact of climate change on regular people and what it could mean for you. And I would just love it if the industry could find its voice and just be shouting about this. If they could be a broken record, and every time you spoke to someone in the insurance industry, they're saying, this is what you need to be thinking about this, because your household premiums are going to go up because of these severe weather events. We should be doing everything we can to mitigate climate change so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and you again completely correct. I mean, you just have to look at the pricing that's going. I mean, just as an example, over the weekend, I'm based in the Midlands. There was horrendous weather in terms of rainfall, like anything I've ever seen. Definitely for sort of September, and there's been flash floodings and floodings across the region. Just on that alone, and it's becoming more and more regular, to be honest. There's probably 4 or 5 times a year where this kind of thing's happening, and you only have to look at the level of claims that have been going through over the years, definitely within property, as you mentioned there, and that's also commercial with business premises as well. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see a steep climb in the number and severity of claims that have been coming in, specifically around weather. I mean, whether that's through subsidence or whether that's through flooding or whether that's through XYZ, really, I think it is quite clear to see. And it is hot on the agenda for a lot of insurers, and everybody knows that premiums are having to go up because of the risk associated to the weather. Yet you are correct that there isn't a lot of shouting from the rooftops of this is due to global warming, or that there doesn't seem to be that direct sort of communication from the insurance industry as a whole, when you can see the key trends, you can see the data, you can see how it's shooting up. So it's quite an interesting point, really. And ultimately, if you could reverse things, it's going to be a lot cheaper for the consumer and far less risk for the insurer as well, right? So I guess that it's within the benefit of everybody to be pulling that way. But again, I suppose that's a micro thing in terms of the benefits of it, when ultimately, if you look at the predictions of further down the line, your grandchildren's grandchildren are probably not going to exist. So in terms of saving on premiums does seem a bit of a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but you are quite correct for the here and now, for sure, right? So yeah, very, very interesting again. So yeah, I think that it's been a really sort of interesting session, and I've definitely opened my mind a lot more in exploring certain topics on it. But away from sustainability a little bit, when you look back at your career, who do you most have to thank for some advice, mentorship, or guidance which really helped you? Is there a specific mentor or leader that really made a difference to your career?
Yeah, I think there's loads. I guess one person I'd like to. I worked very closely with Selwyn Fernandez. I reported into him, and then he went from a pricing into a more general management. So I worked very closely with him as a stakeholder. I think particularly for someone who's come from a quantitative background, if you work in pricing, you're very much data driven. You make decisions by looking at data, you analyze in depth, and then you come up with a conclusion, and that forms your decision. But I think what I learned from Selman was he had a lot of respect for opinions from people who didn't work that way. And I learned that from him. Just because someone has a different approach, they're not data driven, because they might make decisions on gut feel, and their insight and the way they speak may be very different to how you do within the pricing community. Doesn't mean you should just try and put down what they say and try and disprove it. It really actually means you should just really try to listen and appreciate the different perspective. And so it's about how to get not a diversity, but not in terms of background, etc., but in terms of how you approach problems. And that diversity of thinking creates better decisions. And I think he learned that as he went into general management. And I tried to take that on board for speaking to him, arguing him about it at the start, but then realizing sort of where he was coming from.
Yeah, and I would agree. It's a very good lesson to learn. Really, diversity of thought is everything. If you're in a room full of people that all look at every sort of challenge exactly the same way and try and tackle it the same way, quite often, if there's one person that thinks differently, they might be able to come up with a thought or take people in a different direction of thought of, oh, actually, I hadn't considered looking at it from that point of view, from that angle. And ultimately it can make problems disappear a lot quicker than everybody trying to tackle it the same way, and ultimately not getting very far very quickly, right? So yeah.
I'd like to also I'd like to mention I've worked for a long time for John O'Rourke. I don't know if John, John, but and when I first joined his executive, he was chief executive at LV. I had to do a presentation, and this is a very simple thing, but I had to do a presentation to the senior leadership team of about 200 people. And obviously, I was quite nervous this first time. I did the presentation, came off stage, and then looked at my phone, and there was a message from John saying, "Great presentation, well done." And that made a huge impact on my confidence. And, I could take that impact of confidence into the next executive meetings. And it really was clear. What I learned was, if you ever get the opportunity to give someone positive feedback in the moment, whoever they are, just do it, because it makes such a big impact. And John was very, very good at that.
Yeah, and I don't think that people realize just what an impact that it can have with people in people's lives, really, not necessarily just confidence in terms of public speaking or presentations, etc. And it can make such a big impact on the way that they feel and view themselves, and psychologically as well, I guess, right? So I completely get the point, and it's something that I should probably try a little bit more of, and be a bit more mindful of. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense as well.
I definitely do more for my daughter. I do it more often with my daughter, I have to say.
Well, this is it exactly. It's being more. I think it's just making, keeping it in mind, because of the difference that it can make to people. But quite often, I don't want to say absorbed, but you don't really think about it. You don't really reflect and think that those comments can really help somebody on their way. So yeah, it's a good bit of advice and a great bit of learning. But in terms of advice, leading on to the next question, seamless link, what advice would you give someone who wanted to thrive at a strategic director level or board appointment?
Yeah, I think it is quite a change. There's one of my favorite books is War and Peace, which is a bit geeky, but I love the book. And there's a scene in there where there's a Russian general who's leading a battle against Napoleon, and the War and Peace character is with him on the battlefield. And these messengers keep coming up from the various commanders in the field saying like, oh, this Commander X would like to tack on on the right flank. And he would go, yeah, great idea, go ahead and do it. And then another messenger would come up and say, well, Commander Y wants to retreat back into the woods. Is that okay? And he'd say, yeah, great idea, go and do it. And the character realized that whatever the messenger came up and said, he just gave the same response. I might not have it literally, great idea, go and do it, but that sentiment. And I guess it makes you think, you know, he's chosen his commanders, the people he's trust, he's laid out his positions, but once the battles start, there's not really anything you can do. And if he tries to influence it, it'll most probably make it worse. He just needs to trust his commanders to make the right decisions. And I think that's becomes more and more important as you go into leadership, is, you know, get people in place who you trust, you know, provide the right structure, the right governance, and then just let people get on with it. And if you're, you know, presented with something to approve, if you have no reason to challenge it, you know, if you don't challenge it and you don't have any questions, that's great, and you should be looking to do that all the time. And if you can empower people that way, that gives you the time to focus on what's wanted by a board, which most probably looking at wider perspective, you know, things that the people within the operations may not be thinking about because they're a bit further removed. And most of the decisions you're making on the board are not so necessarily numbers based or options, they're more like value based, which is why it's come up to you. So, you know, thinking about your values, having discussions with a large number of external stakeholders so you can get different perspectives and keep away from the risk of groupthink. So I think it's easy in reflection. I know it's very hard when you're doing it. You know, you know, even at whatever level, there's sometimes I've just got to get through Wednesday and then I can focus on Thursday. But, you know, I think it's a good, you know, empower people, trust your leadership. You don't need to challenge, you don't need to show your worth by challenging and questioning. Let people just get on with the decisions, and then use your time to get that external perspective, to be thinking about values, to be thinking about longer term impacts. That would be my advice. So whether I lived it every day, I'm sure not, but yeah, that would be my advice on. I've seen it done at boards and it's very effective.
No, I completely agree. Again, delegation is absolutely massive. You know, if you look at the most successful leaders across any industry, sport or anything like that, delegation is absolutely key. You know, and it's almost relinquishing control of certain things and just having that nerve, I suppose, of trust, of that I know, you know, I've worked with this person, I trust them, you know, 100% to come up with the right ideas. And I think that there's two things that are really important with that. One, the empowerment of that person would breed confidence. Two, if that person was to, if it wasn't to go to plan, then that would be a learning for that person, right? Generally speaking, you learn from mistakes, and if they are in complete control of that, then it is they're going to really live the learn, I guess you could say. Whereas if they're being told, no, we've got to do it this way, and then they do it and it doesn't work, there's almost that resentment then on the powers that be, I suppose, of, oh, well, you know, it wasn't the way that I would do it anyway, and probably lose a little bit of learning as well. And you know, and I think that time as well for you as a leader, you know, if you're micromanaging every single asset and every single sort of nook and cranny of everything, your day's going to go like that. You've got to work a lot harder when ultimately the best results could come from empowering that person. They're the ones with the boots on the floor. They're the ones that probably know more in granular detail about the specifics of the situation than you would. Yes, there's guidance, and probably want to be there to as a sounding board and just to guide and make sure, but ultimately I completely agree that delegation is massively important for senior leadership, so yeah, great bit of advice. But that brings us to the end. Hugh, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Really insightful. Like I said, it's got me thinking an awful lot on where everything comes from and how much of an impact I'm actually having, which is going to be a bit of a thinker for me. But no, really insightful, really interesting. And of course, if anybody watching did want to speak with Hugh about their sustainability process, then I'll put Hugh's link to Hugh's LinkedIn in the bio, I suppose, or the summary section, and feel free to reach out to Hugh and see if there's any synergy and anything that any work that you could do together. But no, yeah, just genuinely really interesting, really insightful. Really appreciate your time, Hugh. Thank you very much. And yeah,
thank you, John. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching, and yeah, we'll be back again soon. Thanks.